Saying no at work is like trying to like defuse a bomb.
Oh, yeah. Especially in software development, right?
Yeah.
The stakes can feel so high sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And I was listening to this podcast called Chronicles,
Hmm.
and they had this episode called like The Art of Saying No Without Torching Your Career.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I've heard that one.
Yeah, and it got me thinking like we should do a deep dive on this because it's something that like I think we all struggle with, you know?
Hmm.
Like how to say no without like, getting negative consequences.
Yeah, totally. And they had some really good strategies in that episode that we can unpack for like devs at all levels,
Mhm.
from junior to senior.
Yeah, for sure. Because like we've all been there, right? Like you're in a meeting and someone asks you to do something and you're like internally screaming no, but you just nod and say yes.
Totally. Yeah, it's like that feeling of like impending doom, like you're signing yourself up for something you just don't have the time or energy for.
Exactly. So let's start with junior devs, right? Because I feel like they're in this really tough spot where they want to prove themselves, so they say yes to everything.
Yeah, they're so eager to learn and contribute, and they don't want to like rock the boat or seem like they're not team players.
Right. But the thing is, like, even early in your career, it's so important to protect your time and sanity.
Absolutely. And the podcast actually had this great anecdote about this junior dev who ended up pulling an all-nighter to make this small tweak to a project.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. So what happened?
So basically, like the senior dev was like, oh, this will just take like an hour, it's just a quick fix. And then it turns out it was like way more complicated than they thought.
Yeah, and the junior dev, like, didn't want to push back because they were new, and they ended up, like, totally burning themselves out.
Exactly. And it's like that's a classic example of why it's so important to like even as a junior dev, learn how to kind of assess your workload and not be afraid to say like, hey, I need to check.
Yeah, and the podcast had this good tip for junior devs, right?
Mhm.
They said, like, instead of saying yes or no right away, just say, let me check my bandwidth.
All right. Yeah, that's a good one. It's like a really simple phrase, but it gives you that space to like actually look at your schedule and see if you can realistically take on the task.
And it doesn't sound like you're saying no right. It's like you're being thoughtful and considerate.
Exactly. And it also sets the expectation that you're not just going to say yes to everything. You're going to be mindful of your time and your commitments.
Yeah, that's a good point because it's like almost like managing technical debt in a way, right? Like if you keep saying yes to everything, you're just going to end up with this huge backlog of stuff that you can't possibly do.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're accruing technical debt with your time and energy instead of with code.
So that's for junior devs. But like what about mid-level devs? Because they're kind of this tricky spot too, right? Where they've got more experience, but they're also often the go-to person on the team.
Yeah, so mid-level devs can easily become like bottlenecks if they're not careful,
Yeah.
right? Because they're the ones that everyone relies on, so they're constantly getting requests from all sides.
Right. And they might be afraid to say no because they want to be seen as helpful and reliable and a team player.
Exactly. And they might also be worried about like stepping on toes or, seeming like they're not willing to go the extra mile.
But the thing is, like, if you say yes to everything, you're going to burn out and then you're not going to be able to do your best work.
Right. And the podcast episode had this other story about this mid-level dev who missed like a family dinner to finish this rush job. And then like the feature ended up getting shelved anyway.
Oh, gosh, that's rough. So what was the point of that story?
Well, it was like to highlight the importance of setting boundaries, right? And not letting yourself get pulled into like every urgent request that comes your way.
Yeah, because not everything that's urgent is actually important.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial for mid-level devs to get good at managing expectations, right? And being clear about what they can and can't do.
And the podcast had this phrase for that, right? It was like, I can do X, but Y will slip cool.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's like it acknowledges the request, but it also offers an alternative and it opens up a discussion about priorities.
Right. So it's not just a flat out no. It's more like a collaborative approach to problem solving.
Exactly. And it shows that you're thinking strategically about how to best use your time and resources.
So we've talked about junior devs and mid-level devs.
Yeah.
Now, what about senior devs? Like, do they still struggle with saying no?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you would think that once you get to a certain level, you wouldn't have this problem, but it's actually the opposite.
Really, why is that?
Because senior devs are the ones who are supposed to be focusing on like the big picture stuff, right? Like architecture and strategy and mentoring.
Right, so they don't have time to get bogged down in like all the little details.
Exactly. And the podcast had this example of a senior dev who agreed to do this like quick consult for another team, and it ended up taking up like a whole week of their time.
Wow, and I bet that totally threw off their schedule.
Yeah, it totally derailed their main project, which was like this really important architectural work for the company.
So it's like, even if you're a senior dev, you still need to be really careful about saying yes to things.
Yeah, and that's where delegation and deflection come in, right? Like you need to be able to like pass on tasks that are not like your core responsibility.
And the podcast had this really good tip for that,
Yeah.
right? It was like, great idea. Let's loop in Junior's name.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to like delegate while also giving a junior dev a chance to learn and grow.
Right. It's like a win-win situation because the senior dev gets to focus on their main work and the junior dev gets some valuable experience.
Exactly. And it also helps to build a stronger team overall.
It seems like no matter what level you're at, like the key to saying no effectively is to give a reason, right? Like, don't just say no, explain why.
Yeah. Transparency is so important because it shows that you've actually thought about the request and you're not just dismissing it out of hand.
Right. And it makes you look like you're being thoughtful and professional instead of just being difficult.
Exactly. And the podcast had some great examples of how to phrase this for each career stage.
Yeah. So for a junior dev, it could be something like, I'm swamped with onboarding tasks right now.
Right. And for a mid-level dev, it could be like, this conflicts with the sprint goal.
And for a senior dev, it could be something like, this pulls focus from Q2 priorities.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you're always tying your no back to like a bigger context.
And I remember they had this story about a dev who used ROI to decline a project, right? Like they basically said, this project isn't going to generate enough return on investment, so we shouldn't do it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one because it's like you're not just saying no based on your own personal preference. You're using like objective data to support your decision.
Right, and that makes it way harder for someone to argue with you.
Exactly. And it also shows that you're thinking about the best interests of the company, not just yourself.
So it's like at the end of the day, saying no is really about protecting your yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're saying no to the things that don't matter, so you
Yeah.
can say yes to the things that do.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it because it's like you only have so much time and energy, right? So you need to be strategic about how you spend it.
And the podcast had this story about a dev who literally burned out from saying yes to everything, and they had to take like a month off to recover.
Yeah, it's like a cautionary tale, right?
Yeah,
Because it shows that saying no is not selfish. It's actually like self-preservation.
totally. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to do your best work for anyone.
And remember that little tip they had about keeping a no journal?
Oh, yeah, where you write down all the time, say no, actually like saved you time and energy in the long run.
Exactly. It's like a way to like track your wins and see the positive impact of setting boundaries.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Mhm.
So, okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here,
Mm.
but the main takeaway is that like learning to say no is crucial for software developers at all levels.
Absolutely, because it protects your time, your sanity, and ultimately your career trajectory.
So here's a question for you listening right now. What's one small request that you could practice saying no to this week?
Yeah, and how could you phrase it using those tactics that we just talked about?
We'd love to hear your no wins, so share your stories with us on social media.
Yeah, let us know how it goes.
Until next time, keep coding and keep saying no.
And protect that bandwidth.
Yeah, definitely protect that bandwidth.
Okay, see ya.
See ya.